He was a famous trumpet man from out Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was the top man at his craft. But then his number came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, a blowin' reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B.
Hi, everybody. Today we are going to talk about what draws America into World War II. So there's a couple of discussion questions we're going to talk about today. The overall big one you have to answer at the end of the notes are what factors led America into entering World War II. So you need to be able, we're working with Tennessee U.S. History Standard 58. You need to be able to explain the reasons for American entry into World War II, including the attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay, so before we get involved in the war, how is the United States trying to help its allies? Okay, what are we trying to do to help our allies? So for the beginning of the war, you should remember from the Great Depression notes, when the war starts in 1939, the United States declares neutrality. Okay, FDR wants to get involved, but the American people are so not for that. They remember the mess that was World War I, and they do not want to get involved in World War II. So the closest the United States could get to helping either side was what we called the cash and carry provision. We do not want to send goods to the countries that are buying from us because Hitler is using submarines to sink ships again. So we don't want to risk American ships and American lives, because if they start getting sunk, then we're going to go into war. So we have the cash and carry provision, and this allows the United States to sell arms to countries at war as long as they paid cash and they transported the goods themselves. Now, this is different. This is the first step away from the Neutrality Acts we talked about at the end of the Great Depression and at the beginning of the World War I notes. All of those different Neutrality Acts where we were saying we can't even do business with a country that's at war because we don't want to look like we're helping a side. This is the first time that we step away from that. Now, we're still saying we're neutral because we will sell to anybody that can buy and that can get over here and pick it up. Okay, we're not picking a country to sell to. Now, on paper, this is neutral, but in reality, Germany, one, doesn't have the cash to buy it, and two, doesn't have a navy big enough to get over here and pick stuff up. So really, the only country that is able to use the cash and carry provision is Britain. They're the only ones that have enough money and a navy big enough to get over here and pick it up. So this is helping Britain, even though we're saying we're neutral. When this doesn't work enough, when Britain's navy starts to get tied up too much in the war, early in 1941, we changed the cash and carry provision to the Lend-Lease Act. In 1941, we say that we will lend or lease war supplies to the Allies. The United States has officially taken a side. The United States is now no longer neutral. Now, we are not actively involved in the war. We're just now saying we hope one side wins over the other. Okay, we want the Allies to win. So what the Lend-Lease Act does is we would lend or rent supplies, tanks, planes, battleships, anything like that to an allied country. So at this point, the big ones are Russia, France, and Britain. We will lend those things to them. But the big part of the Lend-Lease Act is they don't have to come pick them up anymore. We will bring these things to them. Roosevelt compared this plan to lending a garden hose to a neighbor whose house is on fire, right? It's the sensible thing to do. We consider them our neighbors. We want them to win, and this will help them do that. We're just doing the sensible thing here. Okay? So that's kind of where we are, and we would have been the American public would have been happy in our little Lend-Lease bubble. FDR wanted to get involved, but he would have been limited to the Lend-Lease Act if December 7th hadn't happened. December 7th, 1941, for those of you who don't know, was the date that will live in infamy. It is the day that Japan conducted a sneak attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Now, this is kind of Japan's modus operandi. Okay, this is Japan's MO for this war. Like they had attacked Manchuria without warning. By this point, they had attacked Russian parts of Korea without warning, and that's kind of how they win. They wipe out the enemy in a sneak attack, and then the enemy's too weak to come back and fight them. So Japan gets to win. Now, Japan was working with some faulty information. Japan was told that our aircraft carriers would be in Pearl Harbor. Okay. Our aircraft carriers would be there, and their goal was to take out our carriers. Because the only way we would be able to defeat Japan was if we had aircraft carriers. There is no way on God's green earth we would have won against Japan in a land force without aircraft carriers, without air backup. It just would not have happened. So Japan's goal was to wipe out all of our battleships. To wipe out all of our aircraft carriers. And then we just have to stay out of the war because now we don't have any Navy in the Pacific that we can use. So there's actually 2 attacks on Pearl Harbor. The first attack, the fighters come in. The fighters come in and attack the Air Force Base. Okay. Torpedo bombers and dive bombers are going to actually attack Pearl Harbor Naval Base. Okay. The second attack, dive bombers and horizontal bombers are going to come in and attack an air station, and then they're going to attack more at Pearl Harbor Naval Base. So, I mean, if you look at the major ships we have here, now these are just the major ships. Okay. The Vestal was sunk. The Oklahoma was sunk. The Oglala was sunk. Utah was sunk. Damaged, you're going to have all the yellow ones are damaged. Okay. The only ones, we've got a couple undamaged here, but not many. The USS Arizona, the ship that was sunk here, it's actually a naval base now. It's sunk. But they built not a naval base, a naval museum. They built a museum on top of it. So you can actually go out there and you can tour the museum. A couple times a year, they let experienced divers go down and dive the wreckage. It's really, really cool. So this is just devastating to our Navy. Over 2,400 sailors, soldiers, and civilians are killed during this attack. The U.S. Pacific Fleet is basically destroyed. We're crippled here. We can't do it. You've got 8 battleships that are out of commission, 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, and hundreds of planes are just destroyed. And the one good thing we had going for us, you need to know this, write this down. The one good thing we had was all of our Pacific aircraft carriers were out to sea on a training mission. So none of our aircraft carriers were at Pearl Harbor when this attack happened. Which means we're down, but we're not out. Okay? We're hurting really badly, but we are not out of commission yet. Because the Japanese were working with faulty intel, and they tried to take out our aircraft carriers, and our aircraft carriers just weren't there. All right, so the U.S. response. First, we're going to watch this video, and then we'll talk about it.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
All right, so FDR makes his famous Day in Infamy speech where he talks about how we were attacked without provocation and without warning. One of those is true. You could count one thing we did towards Japan as provocation. we had embargoed scrap metal and oil. So we were refusing to sell Japan scrap metal or oil, both of which they desperately needed to keep their military going. So they would have lost all of their fights and collapsed as a country without those two things. And we were keeping them from getting them. So some people could stretch that into that was something that we could be attacked for. I don't personally think that, but some people could. The second thing he's going to talk about is the without warning part. While Pearl Harbor was happening, while it was being attacked, in Washington, D.C., there were Japanese officials meeting with American officials trying to work out some kind of treaty that would keep us from going to war with each other. So while we are in treaty talks with Japan, Japan is attacking us secretly. That's how secret this was, because the Japanese ministers who were in D.C. had no idea this attack was going to happen. So FDR gives this speech on December 8th and asks Congress to declare war. They take a vote immediately. They don't bother debating. They just vote. And the vote is everybody is for it except for one person. The one person who is against it is named Jeannette Rankin, and she is a pacifist. She also voted against World War I. 3 days later, on December 11th, 1941, Hitler makes his second biggest mistake of the war when he declares war on the United States. He declares war on the United States because he is Japan's ally and he's backing Japan up. But before this, our problem was Japan. Japan attacked us. We had to go wipe them off the face of the map. Now Germany's declared war against us, and we consider Germany the bigger threat. So we're going to bring the pain on Germany, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow.